Welcome back. So, Senzo Meyiwa murder trial judge Ratha Mokgoatlheng has apologized for racial comments made against black lawyers. This was in response to defense lawyer Charles Mnisi on Friday asking to be excused from proceedings today as he was participating in the Comrades Marathon. Mokgoatlheng dismissed the request, saying, quote, a white advocate would not have the gall to ask me that, close quote. Now, to discuss the apology and the widespread outrage over the judge's comments, so we're joined by Pan-African Bar Association of SA Secretary General, Advocate Dali Mpofu. Advocate, good evening to you.
Good evening, Melody.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've been playing that apology over and over again since the judge actually made it. But just initial thoughts, you hear the apology. It was not conscious on my part. I do apologize. There's also, you know, suppose that light moment of my wife also suggested that I come forward and apologize. Sincere, are you happy with that apology?
Well, it's not for me personally because I'm just a spokesperson of the Pan-African Bar Association of South Africa. And that body is going to meet in the next day or two to consider its stance. But what we have said, what we can say, even before that decision is made, is that we welcome the apology. And we're happy that PABASA came out in full flight in, in condemning what was really just crass racism. And that obviously was meshed by the silence of the organized profession and other people, other usual holier-than-thou do-gooders who would have, lynched. If this was Moses Kakane or someone, one of the people that they hate, the outrage would have been deafening. But be that as it may, we are, after all, the Pan-African Bar Association of South Africa, which means one of the principles we believe in is Ubuntu. And we don't believe that somebody should be lynched at the stake. So I'm sure those will be the considerations that will be taken into account in dealing with this apology. What we are not ever going to apologize about is calling out racism wherever it comes, and from whether it's a black judge or a white judge or whatever. To make statements like that is completely unacceptable. And we'd like, maybe on a lighter note, to follow you, to thank the judge's wife and all those who prevailed on him over the weekend. I've said before that this is somebody I know for a long time, and I believe that, having gone through the experiences that we went through in this profession in the 80s, the early 90s and so on, it's even more disappointing, let me put it like that, that it could come from somebody like him, because he knows better.
I actually want to come back to that a little bit later, but let's park it for now, because I want to speak to the character of the judge. Even that in that apology, he asked some of the legal representatives in the room to say, if you feel that I cannot continue taking this trial forward, let me know. But he uses some interesting words, we'll get to that in a moment. But after these unfortunate utterances, you as PABASA have then come out and said that you're willing to go to lay a complaint against him with the JSE. Did you start that process?
No, we haven't started it yet. We were in the process of doing so. And obviously, that has now been interrupted by the apology. So, when PABASA meets, it might say, well, we're not happy with the apology, we're going ahead. Or it might say that, we are happy with the apology and say whatever it says. We will communicate as shortly as possible. We're also encouraged that the leadership of the judiciary intervened, because from what he said is that he had some words with the deputy judge president and the judge president, and that those are also encouraging signs. And he also apologized to the Chief Justice as he should. But, as I say, this is not a personal vendetta thing against a particular judge. It is a stance that we take, and we hope that other South Africans should also be very, very intolerant of racism. Because the worst thing we can do about racism is to just throw up our hands and say, oh, well, there it goes again. We must never, ever get tired of calling it out, whether it's gender discrimination, whether it's racial discrimination, or any form of discrimination. This country has gone through such a bitter history for us to tolerate that.
Yeah. I mean, this was a big talking point after those comments were made, and so we've also asked our viewers to comment and talk to us about what they make of that apology by Judge Ratha Mokgoatlheng today, taking those calls on 010-594-6010. Stanley is calling in from Johannesburg. Stanley, good evening.
Good evening to you, lady.
Good evening. Thank you for calling, Stanley. Talk to us.
Yeah, I know Judge Ratha Mokgoatlheng. I actually attended school with him at Fort Hare.
Okay.
Yeah, he's far, far from being a racist.
Okay.
I think what perhaps happened is he should have said some of the black lawyers. Not all. Because I do believe that there are some black advocates who are a shame and a disappointment to some of us who studied law. So they should be called out. But to say all lawyers, then it becomes a kind of a sweeping statement. And therefore it looks like it's offensive. But rather than that, he's a man of integrity. He has the necessary intellect and competency to sit and judge this matter.
Okay.
So I feel so kind of disappointed to a certain extent, but I also feel as if there is a certain unfairness in terms of the criticism that is directed at him.
Okay.
And particularly when it comes from people who themselves have a lot that leaves one, sort of worried about the profession itself.
Okay. All right. Stanley, we appreciate your input. Thank you so much. We'll take one more. Godfrey's in Bloemfontein. Godfrey, good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you for calling. Talk to us.
Good evening.
Yes, Godfrey Mofolo in Bloemfontein. The remarks by the judge were quite disappointing. I'm also disappointed that where I'm here. But he was also disturbed by the conduct of the advocate there. Advocate was also, he lacked also emotional intelligence when he responded to the advocate, to the judge. Also, the judge also responded with lack of emotional intelligence. That's really disappointing, especially in this profession that is also affected like this.
Okay.
In this dispensation.
All right. Thank you so much for calling, Godfrey.
Really.
Okay, I think we've lost him, but the point certainly is made, Godfrey. Thank you for calling. Can we talk about his character? Because you hear Stanley talking about, I know him, and you say you've known him as well all the way back to the 80s. And there's a question around whether or not there still remains a public trust in South Africans as they watch him preside over a case that so many South Africans are so invested in.
Yes, no, that's a very important point, Naledi. As we say, his apology is not directed at us. We're not so presumptuous as to think that it's directed at PABASA because we called him out. It's directed at South Africans, and it's the decision of South Africans whether to forgive him or not. But what we must refrain from, is this thing of making excuses. And saying, whatever Advocate Mnisi did made him to do it. There's nothing that Advocate Mnisi could ever do to make someone to utter racist remarks. So let's get that straight and not make those apologies. And we should assume that Advocate Mnisi, what he did was wrong, or we should even assume that the judge was entitled to say no to his request, which he was, by the way. He was entitled to do that. But to go on and make those remarks, there's no excuse for that. So I think that must be made, that point has to be made very, very strongly,
Just before we close off, because unfortunately we're out of time, but there does need to be a conversation around how we talk about race in our country. Last week after the comments, I specifically remember yourself, Advocate, on this very platform speaking about we do have an issue that needs to be addressed, that is the self-hatred of black professionals and how they view themselves. And even Stanley saying some black lawyers. But misconduct happens surely across all races.
Exactly. I mean, how can you say he should have said some black... Why did he have to talk about black lawyers? He had Charles Mnisi in front of him. He has an array of black advocates in front of him, about 6 or 7 in that trial. If one he thinks has misbehaved rightly or wrongly, why does he have to paint everyone with the same brush? So there's really no excuse for that. But, you know, as I say, we're not here to rehash and publicly lynch him again. The man has apologized. We must now deal with that apology. That apology couldn't have come too early. It should not have happened, particularly because this is happening for the second time. If you remember that he made these kinds of remark and he apologized. He's making it and he's apologizing it again. Is he going to make it for the third time? Well, you know, so it looks like a much deeper problem, but that's an issue that he will have to deal with it between him and his conscience.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can't have judges or anybody for that matter who spews out racism in this country anymore.
So we await PABASA to meet and decide on what the position of the association is, where the judge is concerned.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. We do really appreciate your input. Advocate Dali Mpofu, the Secretary General of the Pan-African Bar Association of South Africa. We've got some WhatsApps that have come in on this one. Let's take a look at what our viewers have made of Judge Ratha Mokgoatlheng's apology. Anonymous says, Judge Mokgoatlheng has been too patient. He has been patronized for far too long. Anonymous, we appreciate your input. Herman says, I'm a white male of nearly 70 years old. I really can't understand what all the fuss is about. He did apologize, so let's just move on. Herman, appreciate your input. Thanks for that. One more. Ismatu says, evening, Naledi. Unfortunately, the judge is frustrated and behaves incorrectly. However, he is the ideal person to conclude the long-standing South African soccer star matter. I suppose, anyway, he's frustrated by us South Africans defeating principles of Ubuntu in terms of timekeeping and priorities. Also, the killer disease, money, that is killing all South African systems, rule of law and others. Thank you. Right. Ismatu, thank you so much for that. We'll continue the conversation on X as well. Let's take a short break. More news on the other side of this.